done that
We've
too.
done. Item number 1, Matt?
Right to Matt.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you, fellow commissioners, for the opportunity to give you a little update on the general plan this evening. Tonight's agenda for this portion of your overall agenda, you can see hopefully on your screen there that I'm just going to take you through an update on the overall process and where we are today to keep you up to speed on that. Then we're going to get into a little bit of a discussion on the status of your homework exercise from last time. If you recall, thank you for all commissioners who went through the goals. We're going to examine kind of the results of that in relation to community feedback that we received. And then all of that, the purpose is to roll up to talk about next steps and upcoming events. So there's not going to be any specific work items per se this evening. It's informational and really a setup to help inform these upcoming events from a general plan status, so that you can either participate and or guide any pre-planning that we are doing in association with these upcoming events. So again, this graphic that we've seen multiple times outlines the overall process. So you can see from a calendar standpoint, we are halfway through our enrich phase, which is the second phase of this process, which is good in the sense of we're on track. We're on schedule in terms of wanting with our upcoming community workshop number 3 coming up on the 19th. We'll be hopefully getting some foundational input on the policy aspects of the general plan, and that will really set us up for starting to put pen to paper and crafting the actual edits to the general plan itself so that we're in a position to get out for our 60-day review on time. So overall, that is what we're working towards, is that 60-day review process, where that is the 2-month period where the plan goes out to the public and everybody can review it, and then take a breath, revise it as necessary, and then get into the formal adoption process. Any questions or comments about process and progress overall?
Yes.
Sure.
When are we scheduled to go with the 60-day review?
I don't have the specific schedule in front of me, but I believe our timeline, I don't know if
Looks like
Stacy.
on the page 8 of 9 of the general plan, public involvement plan.
It would be in our public involvement plan. I apologize, I didn't have a copy with me this evening.
It looks like it's supposed to go out as of maybe September 30th.
September, October. Yes, because that's right. Because it will end in October, and then we'll start the review process in November per the slide there.
Okay, and what form are you envisioning of this 60-day review? Essentially a redraft or an edited version of the current general plan, or I just found out today that you did your update assessment. Is that the right word?
We did an existing conditions assessment.
Yeah, an existing conditions assessment report just got published last week.
Correct.
That looks like that contained most of the substance, not the goals and objectives, but the substance, the factual substance of the existing general plan, plus or minus.
Correct. So
Are you gonna do it that way and then just have pages of goals and objectives, or are you gonna blend it back together? And if you're gonna blend it back together, and we're gonna release it at 9:30, today is 6-something, 6:12, and we only meet 30 days, every will we approve it for posting, or this is a staff function and we're just observing?
Was
Those
just,
are a lot of questions.
yes, I was just waiting for all the options until,
And let me just
Yes.
clarify, October 1st to December 1st is the
Okay.
60-day review period.
all right, thank you. So the long-winded answer is that the 60-day review, we look at that as our opportunity to review the plan in its final state, as far along as we can have the plan. So it's going to be completely drafted, formatted, and as close to a final version that we think it's at that point in time as it can be. The existing conditions report that you referenced, that is a background report that we prepare for our drafting purposes, because as we get into the document, we're looking at new census data, we're looking at new regional data, and all of that data that's in the existing plan has to be updated. And so that's what that existing conditions report is. It's all predicated on research and analysis of current data and reports that are available. So we take that information and we couple it with the feedback that we're receiving through all of this outreach that we're doing. And that, as you pointed out, is where the detail comes into the goals and policies. So that's the community feedback's really driving the vision, the goals, and the policies. And the existing conditions information is just there to inform our decision-making process. So as you can see from the analysis that we went through, that I'm going to be discussing this evening through the goals, we then, at our next community workshop, we're going to share the same results we're talking about tonight with the public, and then get them to start looking at, okay, you've talked about vision, we talked about goals, now we're going to talk about the policies to support those goals. And all of that information can then be packaged up into a first draft of the plan, which then we would start pushing out to the commission to help review and calibrate.
Your guesstimated date for that first draft would be?
I apologize, I didn't bring the full schedule, but I think we have it. Yeah, if it generally is, if we're generally looking at, you said October and November were the 60-day review?
60-day was October 1st to December 1st.
Okay.
That was the review period.
So we would most likely be looking at probably a month prior to that we could be pushing something out to commission for review. I'd have to double check our full, we have a full, obviously detailed schedule that I apologize. I just did not put it in my binder before I came. No, that would have been the preliminary schedule. We have a more detailed one just for our coordination purposes of when notices have to go out, when flyers have to be prepared, all of those.
I'm just trying to figure out the process here. So you're guesstimating that on September, plus or minus September 1st, we would have the first draft of the plan that's pushing out, right?
Going off of memory here, yes.
Okay. But that would only give us one meeting to consider that, right?
Correct.
Okay. Just, I guess, out of interest sake, is it at all feasible, I don't know, to get that out August 1st? So that we would have the August meeting to discuss it?
We have the August meeting to discuss the 60-day draft, correct.
Oh, so it will come out plus or minus August 1st?
We would have a working draft for you at that time. I just wouldn't have a complete graphically prepared imagery, everything.
The tables would be in there and the text would generally
Correct.
be in there, but it wouldn't be pretty.
Correct.
Okay. And so that would give us two meetings to consider that before we release it to the public for comment, the 60-day review.
Correct. The 60-day review starts in October, as Stacy mentioned.
Okay, and then, how is the public going to, how do we receive feedback from the public?
Well, I mean,
Or who receives feedback?
we still have an opportunity to vet this, but typically our approach would be that we have we push out the draft of the plan, obviously, and then have on the project website residents' ability to review the plan online and then provide any of their comments online, just as we've done up to this point.
Okay, I'm
So-
not sure I'm reading this right from this early preliminary plan, but it looks like there's 4 hearings in February, March, April, and May.
We have the 60-day review. When it starts in October, we have scheduled a community workshop number 4, scheduled in October to go over that 60-day review. So in addition to putting the 60-day review online, and residents can look at it at their leisure during those 2 months, we also scheduled an in-person meeting to give a broad overview. We're not going to be able to go through it page by page, but show residents the general context of the general plan, and then they also could provide comments in person at that meeting. So we either coordinate with them online or in person.
Okay, so just so that I understand, we're gonna have 2 meetings before it goes public.
We have one additional meeting scheduled with the Planning Commission in August to go over it. If we needed to add an additional meeting, I'm sure Stacy and we could work on that.
Okay.
Matt, can you just give us a chronological, step-by-step for the next 6 months
So,
of the dates and what's
we
going
have,
on?
sure.
And you can do that in a memo.
Yeah.
If you would just tell us where we're going, whether our meetings are gonna be public meetings, or just we're sitting here listening to you and
And
dialogue.
what the expectations are.
Well, your meetings will always be in public.
Well, I
Right.
know it'll be, when I say public, I mean having, comments from the public on the document.
Okay.
I don't know whether that's the plan or that's not the plan.
Right.
We can prepare a memo for you to detail the steps, but as far as coordination with the Planning Commission, we were anticipating that we would be coordinating with the public through our community workshops, and that the Planning Commission, I mean, when we get to the adoption process, which we're required to then have a public hearing, we would have a public hearing and residents could provide comments at that point. Up until that time, we have a work session, which the commission is able to take comments during a work session. It's just, it's up to the commission's choice at that point.
And I'd just like to add, if we see the document August 1st for the first time, thinking of the calendar in my mind, that basically gives us a little over a week before our next commission meeting, the way the days fall in August. So I'm just suggesting that it's a lot to absorb, reflect upon, and be able to actually provide real input if we have about a week to 10 days to look at it.
Yeah, we're restricted by the ratification date. I can't move that date, and so that date sets everything from there backwards. So we try to fit in as much as we can, but we also have to leave ourselves time to prepare the plan itself, so.
Suggestion of putting this down in writing so that we have a better idea of what our expectations are, because I just feel like we're kind of,
We need something concrete that we can follow. So we can be prepared.
We
And
can-
dates.
We can prepare that for you, sure.
Thanks, Matt.
sorry to interrupt.
No, all good questions, and we're happy to put some clarity to it. But But yes, the overall process is going to, the overall process will be supported at the community level through our public outreach that we've been conducting up through this point. The Planning Commission was always viewed as a sounding board, right, for this effort. So it wasn't, all of the emphasis wasn't expected to be put on Planning Commission to completely draft, review, and prepare the plan. It was to be another layer of consideration as we go through the process.
understand that, but at some point, there's going to be, I assume, there's going to be a yes or no vote from this commission.
You would provide a recommendation to council, correct?
So we just have to be
Prepared.
involved.
Right, and that's why I'm emphasizing, like tonight, about how to participate overall in the process
Okay.
and not just at planning commission meetings. Yes.
Good enough. Can I just make one other observation? When we post a new document to the website for the general plan, can you send out, at least to us, a notice, if not the public? Because as you know, I was looking for a report and it wasn't there, and I found out it was posted last week.
Right, I apologize, it's just, we're trying to get the information up as quickly as we can, but you're right.
But it'd be helpful to us so that we know that we're.
And we'll let the community know, absolutely.
Good idea.
All right, any other questions on
Really?
process and progress? Well, all right. Okay, so just as an update then, in terms of some past efforts and updates, obviously the community survey was completed. Last time we met, that survey was still open, so I'm going to take you through some of the results this evening. If you participated in any of the previous workshops or council briefings, you would have possibly heard these results already. You could also view them online. But again, for consistency purposes, I would want to just take the commission through those results this evening. So we're going to go through those quickly at a high level. And then as far as community workshop number 2, we conducted that. Had great turnout. We took residents through some of your feedback in terms of the vision statement. So we gave residents 2 options, kind of a long version or a short version of the vision statement. And residents shared their feedback on that at the last workshop as well as online. So we made final edits to that, and we'll go over that this evening, and that's going to be part of the community workshop number 3 as well. And then as far as the community trends, you'll see from the survey report that there were certain trends that the public or residents found key. And so at community workshop number 2, we asked residents to give more detail on those. And so we'll share some of the feedback from that input. And then last, the general plan goal assessment. So just as we asked the commission to go through the goal worksheet, we actually asked the public to go through the same exercise at the last workshop and then as well online. So we're going to share some of that input and talk through kind of how that influences the process. In addition to that community workshop, we also had a council work session where we, as you can see, updated the council on the process and the survey results, and then also talked to them about your feedback and the information on the organizational structure of the plan. So if you recall, during our last commission meeting, we presented kind of 2 options, one following the rigidly following state statute in terms of the topics that the plan must address, An alternative version was kind of organizing the plan around themes, but still addressing those required elements. Council suggested that while commission thought that it would be best to stick with the current format, which is kind of focused on the topics that are required per state statute, council thought it might be best to bring that discussion actually to residents. So we're going to take that same conversation and vet it with residents next Monday, I think is the 19th. So we're to be continued on that specific topic in terms of how we might organize the plan, but that obviously is very key to us in terms of putting pen to paper, because we need to even in advance need to know where the plan is going in terms of its overall structure so that we can guide the writing of it. Questions, comments about any of the events or discussion topics? Okay, hearing none, then I'm just going to jump into the survey results itself. These are not all of the questions that were in the survey. These are the primary questions overall and the basic takeaways. So you see the survey was available from March 17th to April 17th. I think we last met April 10th, so it was still open and didn't have all the results for you. We received 362 responses. That is a great turnout. We always want more. It does, with a community the size of Carefree, it does rise to being a sampling, giving us a 95% sampling confidence level, and then that's with a 5% margin of error. So,
Madam Chairman,
yes.
I object to that conclusion because this was not a random sample. And in order to reach that kind of confidence, this is a self-selected population.
That's what.
So it is, you cannot expand the results from that to the population at large.
That's
if
why.
If it's a self-selected population.
Right. That's why it emphasizes that it's a sampling confidence level and not an overall confidence level.
Okay, but what you're saying is that if you were to survey a population of approximately 3,800 residents, you would need a sample size of about 400 people.
Correct.
And at that level, you would get 95% confidence. But this sample was not a random sample.
Correct.
And therefore, you could say that a sample size of 362, if it were random, would produce a 95% confidence level. But the way that this is stated, I think misrepresents statistics and sample sizes.
That's
So,
certainly not the intent.
okay, if you could clean that up, because that implies that you're 95% confident that the results of this reflect the views of the population of Carefree, and that's not true.
That is true that we were not intending for this statement to suggest that it was a scientifically valid survey, that this was just to confirm that 362 responses does give us a confidence level in terms of the feedback that we're receiving.
No, because it's not randomly selected.
Okay.
I'm concerned that it conveys something that's not true.
We can exclude utilizing the percentage clarifications and just simply state that we had 362 responses.
You put a comma and it said, although it was a self-selected sample. There's just a huge difference between a randomly selected sample and a self-selected sample.
Understood.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So moving on, we'll at least share the results of the information we received from residents that seemed, based off of comments shared at the community workshop as well as at council meetings, that it was in keeping with those in attendance. No residents in attendance raised any issues with the general feedback. Not talking about the numbers, but just in terms of the actual results. As we get into it, we saw that naturally we have a preponderance of full-time residents, but if you compare that to the kind of distribution of part-time residents, I think it would probably balance out. We don't have specific statistics on the number of part-time residents in Carefree, but the overall distribution of property owners with part-time residents and full-time residents, it was encouraging to see that we received all three.
Is it possible, I know it's gonna be a long, is it possible for you to ping the Carefree Water Company and just find out based upon their utilization of water by account to get another view of how many people are part-time versus full-time?
We
Think about it,
could
leave it at that.
we could research that. I guess my follow-up question would be, beyond just curiosity, is there a specific outcome we're trying to confirm?
Well, I think that if we talk about in the data for the general plan, we talk about the vacancy rate being at 25% of residential properties. And then, which is always confusing because the census is based on census data, I assume, which is taken as April 1st. So April 1st is right at that shoulder season when people are leaving or people are staying, you know, the boulders tend to clear out April, May for sure. So it'd just be interesting if you could see a profile from the water company as to what the water utilization is, because that would give you a pretty good idea of the accounts.
Oh, no, I understand the data. I guess we would want to, will the information help us inform some of our decision-making?
Well, to the same extent that knowing the median income of Carefree informs the decision making, yes. And especially when you're talking about vacant units, because there's a whole page of analysis in there that 25% of the units are vacant, and of that 25%, 18 points of it are seasonal people, and 5 points of it are homes for sale, and 3 points of it are vacant or something. I mean, you went through that data analysis.
Yeah, I guess I was just,
But the problem with that is the April 1 cutoff for census data.
right. I was just more wanting to make sure if there was a specific topic that you were trying to get to, that if we couldn't get that information there, is there some other way we could answer that same question? So that's all that I was trying to validate.
I'm just trying to validate something like it's 75% election. That's not my own,
Gotcha.
just get a sense of how many people.
Peter, I apologize to interrupt you. Could you please speak into your microphone? Yeah,
Sorry
thank you.
about that. So, it's just a curiosity factor and just adding to the data.
And I'd just like to say that the data are interesting, but this is a little misleading because it addresses 100% of the respondents, but a full-time resident may also be a property owner.
Right.
And a business owner may be neither a full-time or a part-time resident. So there's some double counting here that suggesting, you know, that yes, it's 100% of the respondents, but it doesn't quite give the picture that this breakdown suggests.
And all very good comments. I think the thing that we would encourage everyone to remind themselves is that this is a one input of many for the general plan. So I appreciate everyone's desire to have a vetted statistic or scientifically significant survey, but all of the information that I'm sharing with you is just one set of inputs that we use to then inform additional questions that we might share with the public. So I guess I'm just trying to emphasize that I appreciate the observations on the results, but also bear in mind that they are not the end-all be-all in terms of what we're using to make final decisions. Any other questions or comments?
Dare you ask?
Well, I do have a comment. So you talked about using the water records that may or may not work because you could own a home and then rent it out when you're not here and be part-time. So you still may have somebody in the house, I've done that before, where you're still using the water and electricity and everything. So I'm not sure if that's gonna help us get that information. But if I look at this correctly, people were allowed to say, like you said, indicate all that apply. So somebody could be full-time and then be a property owner and a business owner. But I fully don't understand where they were going with all this information. Like, what is that gonna provide us with this general plan?
I'll be happy to
Yeah.
keep going and see
Okay.
where we end up. Okay. So we also asked residents, how long have you owned property or owned a business in Carefree? This one, again, we were just trying to ensure that as we're looking at information that we don't have an overbalance of any particular subgroup. So here we thought it was a good representation that we had a general balance of those that have been living within the community or have a presence in the community from less than 2 years, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, and then even 11 to 20. So it's, again, just a barometer for us to validate the feedback that we received through the survey. So the fact that there was a balance of near-term and long-term residents we thought was a good sign. When we look at age, naturally the community, we know we have a higher median age in this community, so you can see that the results indicate that from majority of respondents are 45 years or older. We had a pretty equal balance of male and female. And then also, it's sometimes maybe overlooked, but within the survey, we wanted to also get a geographic representation of residents. So we did provide this image with different areas of the community and asked for those to identify where they currently reside. So you, again, can see the distribution of the kind of primary areas, 2, 3, and 4. Have a pretty good balance with Area 1, which is the least populated area in the, as indicated on the map, has a smaller percentage. So again, some balance there. As we look at why do you choose to live in Carefree, we identified check all that apply, and so you can see here that the top 4, if you will, 50% or more, speak to recreation and trail opportunities, the overall design and semi-rural character, the proximity to natural open space, and the aesthetic beauty of our natural environment. So all consistent, as you'll see as we go through the other results, but also the fact that residents identified those responses that were most prevalent in terms of influencing why they chose to live in Carefree. It also is interesting to see those that may not have performed as highly, and also kind of clarify within our work that some of these things aren't maybe as influential from a quality of life standpoint to residents than some others that we may have previously anticipated. Now, this one is obviously very hard to read, but this is one that we vetted additionally with the community through our last workshop. But the purpose of this particular question was asking residents to try and identify some of the trends that we're seeing within the area currently. So we listed out a number of different conditions and asked residents how important are the following trends Carefree has experienced recently. And so this was only, it's not trying to track up or down, but just are these topics from a current standpoint important. And so when you see the orange or green colors, those indicate essential or very important. And so if you somewhat just focus on those, the green arrows show the top 4 responses that residents identified as being essential or very important. So traffic congestion, semi-rural character, town fiscal sustainability, and then natural open space and resource preservation. So all of those topics, obviously you can start asking yourselves, okay, well, what are residents concerned about within that? And so that's what we explored through our last community workshop, which I'll share those results in a few slides. So from that, we also wanted to talk with residents about how do you rate the overall quality of life in the town overall. And we can see that residents were positive in supporting the overall quality life from good to excellent. You know, a high majority either rated it good to excellent, and so hopefully through this general plan process we can do this again in 10 years, and that 45% will be 50% or something higher. But that is very encouraging as we do this work across the state. We don't typically see communities with that high of percentage from good to excellent. So I think that is very encouraging as well, and more reason why we want to be diligent in our updating process. This next question focused more on now looking forward, right? We talked about looking at existing conditions, but if we were to look 10 or 20 years into the future, what are some of the main issues that we think the town should focus on? And again, we see residents talking about open space preservation as being important. We also have residents indicating that water conservation and water resources and treatment is important. And then from a lesser degree, but still over 50%, public safety, town communications, and town fiscal health. And so, again, if you think back to some of the prior results, it doesn't really shift in terms of if we're looking at residents' views on current challenges compared to what our challenges might be as we try to look into the crystal ball. They all seem to be consistent with those general observations of open space, town communications, fiscal health, and water. So that kind of takes us through some of the primary takeaways of the survey results. I'd pause there to see if commission had any questions before I move on to talk a little bit more about the vision statement.
Questions?
Microphone. Thank you. The posting on this has us, the community workshop's gonna be next Monday, right?
Correct.
And that's gonna be the one that has State Land Department, right?
No,
No,
It's
that's
July.
July.
July 17th.
Okay, given the, excuse me, the high ranking for water in this discussion, might it be possible to add to that July meeting some briefing on water as well?
I'll have to,
Will you consider it at least?
yeah, it's not a hesitation on, don't want to have the
No.
discussion, it's just timing.
Right.
We had scheduled that, July 17th meeting just for open space, and it's scheduled for an hour and a half, so I didn't want to, impact that discussion. So we may, if it's a briefing, maybe it's something we could have informational there. But if we were wanting to have kind of a back and forth, we may need to think about some other ways we might fit that into the overall process.
Okay, it's just that those rank the next two highest, and water is the existential question for us here. And I know that we have a section in the report on water, but it's all changed, what with the acquisition of the Carefree Water Company acquiring the Cave Creek assets and their CAP allotment, and then everything that's going on with the CAP and the Colorado River and yada, 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 it would probably be a good idea for us to just get some sort of background on water.
I don't know if it's realistic to have Sarah Porter speak.
Well, I would
Oh.
just like to even just have our water guy,
Greg?
Greg, yeah.
Greg, come and speak. What's our allocation? What does he foresee with this plan? How much are we pumping? Can we take our excess allocation and recharge with it? I mean, right now, we're just not using our excess allocation as I understand it. And how big is the aquifer, and why do we have a 500 acre foot limit on pumping out of the aquifer? All of those questions, I'd like to have an opportunity to discuss it, and I think it's such an important issue for us that it ought to be a component of our preparation of the general plan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We'll certainly look into that and
Thank you.
coordinate with staff to see where and how we could best accommodate that.
Could that be done earlier than the July?
We will, we'll certainly look at what dates are available. It's going to be dependent on when those that can speak to the topic are available, obviously. But we also were trying to be sensitive from a meeting standpoint, because we were, told that to try and be light on meetings over the summer. So obviously the plan has to keep going. So if it's something that we want to bring to residents, then we'll offer it, and if they can make it, they can make it. But we'll try to see what we can do to get something brought forward sooner than later.
Thanks, Matt.
Sorry, just making a note. Okay. So I want to visit this topic, but I also don't. I hesitate because talking about vision, you can continue to talk about this for the whole time we're preparing the plan. But I also do want to put somewhat of closure on it in terms of showing at least where we are, predicated on the feedback that we've received. So when we discuss the vision statement in the current general plan, as we all may recall, it's a lengthy vision statement. So we had a discussion at the commission level, had some different thoughts and input. We also took that vision statement to the community at Community Workshop number 1, and residents shared input. And so that's where we ended up drafting kind of a revised long version and then a shorter version that residents thought that a specific aspect of the existing plan was more of the vision. And so that's what we crafted here, is that through all of that iteration, through Community Workshop 1 and the input we received, then taking the vision to the commission, as well as taking the vision options back to the community at workshop number 2. Through all of that input, residents, the consensus, not obviously all, felt more in favor of a brief or briefer vision statement than the longer version. They supported having a statement that came from that existing vision and then was slightly modified to speak to Carefree aspires to maintain its characteristics of a community with a high quality of life, a vibrant town center, and peaceful, well-designed, semi-rural neighborhoods that blend into the natural terrain in a manner that is sensitive to the native vegetation and wildlife. But what's important to that statement that I think was key to residents is that supporting that with the following values, that as we talked about it, residents shared certain context that they wanted to clarify. And so to clarify that, we identified these values that were important to the community. So within our vision, it is important to our community that we are a distinct, authentic, and welcoming town. So if we were to achieve this vision, as we do it, we want to make sure that we are a distinct and authentic and welcoming town. We respect our environment and are stewards of our open space and scenic amenities. We enjoy healthy, active lifestyles that are focused around our natural recreational opportunities. We are a safe place to live by meeting the community's need for connectivity and services. And we all benefit from a prosperous economy and fiscal town stability. So that is the current version of the vision statement and values that we would be moving forward with. Just to put into context, this is the overall vision statement. Based on residents' input, they still felt that the language was applicable and appropriate, but just in maybe different locations. So here what we're showing is that the first 2 paragraphs of the vision statement, residents believed were important, but didn't rise to being a vision statement. And so our thought is that this text still could be supported in the general plan more as an introduction to the general plan as opposed to the vision statement itself. You can see the green there is where residents most responded to in terms of taking that language to create the structure of the actual vision. The text that struck in red was the text that through all of the rounds of input, residents seemed to have the most challenges with this paragraph. They seemed to, of all the comments that residents didn't agree with, they all mostly navigated to this particular paragraph of being concerned that we're making decisions based off of adjacent communities and that we should be making decisions based off what's best for Carefree. So that text is generally struck because it didn't necessarily speak to what residents or founding fathers of the community spoke to. But the last paragraph does start to set the tone for what residents felt the general plan should work towards. And so this, again, language as it was reworked and presented, still, we feel could have a home in the general plan in terms of, again, in an introduction type of condition or location, whereas the vision statement, again, would be more succinct with some supporting values. With that, I would just clarify that this, in terms of our community workshop next week, we would be bringing this forward to the community to share and ask them to express any final concerns with this proposed approach. So we're kind of taking it out of that option A or option B and saying this is the option. Is there any final concerns or comments that you may have on this? And so with that, I would open that same comment up to the commission, and we would balance that feedback again with the feedback we receive from the community and make any refinements as necessary.
And the existing vision statement would be more of an introduction and less of a vision statement, you mean, is that what you said?
No, thank you,
The next
Commission-
slide where you had the strikes and adds.
Yeah, this slide would in essence be a standalone section to say, this is the vision for the plan.
Right.
And these are the values to go with it. What I was trying to convey is that we want to let everyone know that still doesn't mean we're just gonna ignore all the other parts of the vision that some residents felt were of value, just maybe not relative to a vision statement. So our suggestion was that this language is more akin to something that we would include in a typical introductory chapter, if you will, to the general plan itself than as the vision. And so we thought that it could still have a very prominent location in the general plan, but just wouldn't be titled as a vision statement.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think a lot of this information, I think it's good information. It's more explanatory more than really looking at, you know, how we want to, you know, see ourselves, or what are the, you know, the sort of intention of a vision, so to speak. This is just sort of really more supportive information, and it's still good text in my opinion. It doesn't have any sort of slant, it's just information. I don't know if anybody else sees that differently.
Well, and to, so I was just going to say, to hopefully put the commission at ease, we're not necessarily asking you to bless this vision statement tonight. It was more, if you had an initial thought, you're more than welcome to share it. But I just wanted to present the current approach to you so that you have a early view of that compared to what the residents will see on Monday. And then based on that feedback, we'll make modifications as needed as we obviously continue to go through the drafting process. So there's no, you know, there's no absolutes here. This continues to evolve, but we also don't want to spend all our time focusing on the vision when we have all these goals and policies that are really going to drive a lot of the decision making.
Can you just offer a little bit of explanation of the last added sentence?
The socially strong community bonds.
Right. By providing opportunities for
So-
citizen involvement. Is there a big feeling that there's not citizen involvement? And who's supposed to provide it?
So we have heard through our outreach efforts and a lot of the open-ended comments that we've received online, as well as our fun post-it note exercises, speak to wanting the community to be transparent and be more, provide more information to the public. And so we were trying to incorporate in the vision statement something that acknowledged that spoke to what it is that the community wants to be from an informed standpoint. So we were looking at this more as at this time it was a vision or introductory statement that it's cutting both ways, that it's what residents are looking to be, but it's also identifying what is necessary to do that as well, if that makes sense.
Okay, and diverse places for residents to gather are, I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean the town is supposed to put a beer hall up? I don't know.
We heard through community feedback that open space was important, that having other places for residents to meet and interact was desirous. So we were just trying to state something broadly, because at that point in time we're not clear on what a recommendation might be, but acknowledging that residents were sharing that they like opportunities to mingle and to interact with one another, and to not just have it be the village center.
I mean, I find that to be difficult to turn into an action statement.
I mean, it could be, if you want to move it into a specific action statement, it could be multiple options. It could say that you're looking to create new development that would offer opportunity for interaction. You could suggest that it creates more event type of conditions for residents to gather. We can delete the sentence if it is creating concern. We hadn't received any comments through our outreach up to this point, i.e. through community workshop number 2. There was no strong opposition to that addition.
Okay, I just question what it means.
Well, I think like what Matt said, I mean, the general plan, you know, the introductory portion, it is about sort of establishing some broader brush statements that reflect the vision, and it's working towards then these specific goals and policies to get us to, yes, what is a socially strong community bond? What is the opportunity to provide that to the citizenry? And I think a lot of it also is sort of communication based as well. We've always heard in the last couple of years, Gary Neese will talk about the importance of communication. So I think it's basically it's a very broad statement, and that's the point. It kind of begins us to then create the framework of how do we accomplish this. So I think that's what Matt, I don't mean to speak for you, but I think that's what we're trying to say. Unless there's something about it that you just don't like, I mean, maybe you don't feel we need to support a strong community bonds or provide opportunities for more citizen involvement. I don't think that's what you're saying, but I think we're going to explore how to do that later in the plan.
I'm just wondering if, just to say that socially strong community bonds are supported by enhanced citizen involvement, means that you recognize that citizen involvement is crucial to the town. This right now, I'm not sure where you go with it. I mean, what I'm saying is just sort of recognize that an involved citizenry helps the town move forward.
All for that. I just don't, providing opportunities for diverse places for residents to gather. I'm just having a difficult time with that because I don't know.
Visualizing it.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I mean, I think Stacy's correct that as a broad statement that was setting a tone, we were trying to lump, I will admit, multiple areas into a succinct comment. But if it's creating confusion, we're not, you know, we're not going to go to the mat, they'll say, on that particular statement. It was just trying to align all of the different types of feedback from residents who had different ideas about what the community should be providing or how it should be engaging with each other, and so we just identified it as diverse places rather than starting to specifically list all of the different thoughts that residents had. But again, we're not, I mean, we would expect, and the plan's role is to then all of the other goals and policies and the rest of the plan are all laid out to bring clarity to whatever statements are made early in the document. So yes, this would just be an opening comment that would then have to be refined and clarified through the actual content of the plan. But if it's creating angst, we can remove it. So we'll make note of that, and make sure that we get specific feedback at the workshop on how we might want to proceed overall.
I do have a comment about that statement right there. Where did, where in all the charts you've shown us is there support for people wanting more citizen involvement and multitude of places to gather? Was that in there somewhere? Did you see it? I'm looking at what the citizens want.
Yeah, in the community survey, not the actual results that we went over, but the individual comments. If you were to view the community survey report, there's a lot of residents could provide additional clarity to the feedback they provided. So there's a lot of input there that speaks to that.
Okay.
There is a lot of feedback on the input from the community workshops themselves. So either the post-it notes or the virtual workshops we had online. So this is just a packet of which we haven't formatted yet, but this is a packet of all the comments, individual comments from the goal exercise virtually online. So residents have the ability to provide additional clarity to their short answers. And so that's where some of that's coming from.
Just for the record, this is an opportunity for enhanced citizen involvement, and we have 7 citizens here. Just for the record.
Yeah, that was kind of where I was going with it. Where's support for this? Because I come to these meetings too. So it's interesting, but if this came from like one person or came from a whole group, that'd be interesting to find that out. I'm having trouble with that sentence too, and I think it might just be how do you define diverse for me. But I also see that the city offers so many things already happening in the city weekly. It seems like, so I don't follow this one either, because it seems like we're already doing that.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with any comments made, but I would say we have received a lot of comments about desiring for more information. Whether I stutter through that because it's trying to balance out residents' it's a struggle to always inform residents, right? To keep them engaged, even if we have a lot of different ways that we're informing them. Residents often, because they have busy lives and gain their information through different means, feel like they may need to have better coordination, and it might actually be the answer is just that different methods need to be made to inform them, but the process to gain their input is already there. It's just they're not aware of it, for example. So some of this in terms of socially strong community bonds should be supported, might not necessarily be adding more effort. It might be just informing residents in another way or more diligently.
And citizen involvement feels like maybe they're wanting more involvement with the city and with like what we're doing here. I mean, that's what when I hear the word citizen, I think of this kind of environment as opposed to residents. So I'm just wondering if that's what they meant. I mean, it's not clear what they're talking about, but if they meant more citizen involvement with the city or with government or something of that nature, that'd be more clear.
I would say it's probably more along the lines, and this is just me anecdotally looking at the comments, that it is more from a not in terms of community events type of information, but they're looking more at specific available specific information or data that was used to inform a specific decision, something to those lines.
Okay, I think that's where the clarification would need to come in, but I guess that's what the workshops are for.
Any other comments overall? Okay. So one of the other things to that, I think it's a good segue of we try to unpack some comments if we see that we're getting a lot of input and we want to drill down deeper to understand what the nuances of that specific condition is. And so as I mentioned when we were going through the survey, that there was 4 topics of current trends that were most important to residents. And so these are those 4 topics that we brought these topics to residents at the last community workshop and online as well. And so just ask them to tell us what are some opportunities and challenges within these topics that you are concerned about. And so to bring clarity to some of these, you can see the comments there are generalized. We couldn't put all of the comments or fit all of them on there, but these are generally some of the themes that came out of the input collected. So we received comments about, from a traffic congestion standpoint, wanting to be mindful of lower speeds. We saw a lot of comments about roundabouts. And when we say plus or minus, that's some comments were about we want more roundabouts. And then there was some comments about we don't want any roundabouts. We had comments about the one through lane along Tom Darlington through the town center, and plus and minus were the same. That we had some comments saying they're concerned about only having one lane through town center, and that might create congestion. And then others expressed that they thought the back and forth of changing lanes in and out as we currently do was a problem and confusing. So again, why we kind of put a plus and minus there. From a traffic congestion standpoint, we saw a desire of sidewalks and parking, or addressing sidewalks and parking in the town center. Looking at intersection control at Cave Creek and Tom Darlington, and then overall just enforcement from a traffic congestion standpoint. So those are all areas that we're going to be looking at when we are addressing traffic congestion. From a semi-rural character, Again, what are residents mindful of within that topic? They want to be sensitive to maintaining that low-density residential development. There was a lot of comments about restricting high-density residential housing, comments about building height, and obviously that relates to multi-story buildings, so we kind of got comments about both of those. And then also advocating for development of the corner of Cave Creek Road and Carefree Highway. And then also a handful of comments about light pollution and protecting our night sky. From a town fiscal responsibility standpoint, we received a lot of comments about wanting a smaller town government. And so the plus there is just that there was a higher number of comments, repeat comments, than others. So we also heard reduced staff and use of consultants was mentioned kind of in and above the smaller town government. So there was comments both from a budgetary standpoint and from a staffing standpoint. We had the government should be more transparent. So again, back to that comment about information sharing. Again, under this topic, also develop the corner of Cave Creek Road and Carefree Highway, and alternatively preserve the corner of Carefree Highway and Tom Darlington. Then also natural open space. By far the most commented topic that we received through either the survey or the follow-up comments. But when we asked what is it about open space, preservation of the 48-acre trust land was certainly the most commented comment. Now, we heard a lot of follow-up with that to support walking and biking. So we got a lot of input on that. Interestingly, and so this would be an example of something we would want to be exploring with residents in the July 17th open space workshop, is that we also heard residents talk about wanting a park with more outdoor activities like pickleball and dog parks. And so for us, from a planning standpoint, those are two different kind of feedback points of what is open space, right? And so that would be something we would be looking to explore at that outreach meeting is, I don't think it's a question of if open space is important. That's not what that meeting's going to be about. It's about how open space is addressed in the general plan. And so trying to understand where the community's viewpoints are on when we say preserve open space. To some, that means I just want, light touch, maybe some walking trails and biking. But then when we have others looking at it from a park standpoint and pickleball and the dog park, what does that view? And is that in conflict or contrast with what others are envisioning, so that we're not advocating or promoting something in the general plan that is confusing or not consistent with the overall consensus. So that's an example of something that our open space meeting hopefully can shed light on. But it's also when we see preserve the corner of Carefree Highway and Tom Darlington, restrict development of new homes, and balance development with preservation, that would be the second component of that particular meeting is when we're trying to explore what does open space mean, we're also trying to explore where is open space being considered. We've heard from some residents through their detailed input that it's not all about that 40-acre piece, and that open space is a broader topic to be considered across the community. And so wanting to have or not have tunnel vision on just talking about the 48 acres and also being mindful of other areas across the community. So that, additional information gave some clarity to us about how we might structure that open space meeting. But overall, we just share this information to help inform you in terms of some of the more detailed observations that residents shared.
On that open space piece, I know you're saying, what is open space, but I think it's also critical that you look at, you're calling it natural open space. I don't see pickleball as part of something that respects the Sonoran Desert and the natural environment.
Bingo.
So to some extent, I think that may be the more critical piece, and how does it fit back into the essential vision of the town?
Completely agree. That's why we saw value in that meeting, and why we want to make sure that meeting addresses or gives clarity to some of those conflicting points of input. Because it is very much different when we're talking passive open space, active open space, or preservation overall.
Question for you. In the old report, or the existing report, whatever you want to call it, there was some comment that said something about maybe 26% of the residential lots had not been developed, or 25%, somewhere.
I don't know the number, but I
Right.
know the conversation you're speaking of.
Right. Are we chasing that down in terms of what the current level of that is? And then I would be interested in what is the zoning breakdown of those lots? Because if they're, R170, that's one house per 2 acres. So you could develop a lot of that, and with our zoning code and the building envelopes, you're not going to really be yes, there will be some impact on open space, but it's not going to look like Manhattan.
Right. Setbacks.
Yeah, we certainly were going to be updating that information. I don't know that we're going to align it with zoning, but that's something we can look at.
And can you give a little bit more insight into restrict development of new homes? What was the thought of that?
And so that's where we want to be transparent. Those are the comments we receive, right, from residents. I would qualify that to those residents that there is only so much we can do when we say restrict development of new homes. We recognize that residents often maybe want to be the last one through the door, but we don't want to sit here and cherry pick comments, so we put it on there to acknowledge that that's the feedback we receive from residents, but we would also anecdotally acknowledge that there is limitations, either legally or just physically, that we wouldn't be able to probably restrict development of new homes to the extent that maybe some residents would want to see. But that's, I don't know if that answers entirely your comment, but that's the kind of background to that.
One of the other things I think that might be, and balanced development with preservation, one of the things that impresses me sitting on this commission is that given the zoning of certain pieces of property, 1 acre, 2 acre, 5 acres, and our specificity of a building envelope that can't exceed X percentage of the property, really, and no disturbance, disturbance area, no disturbance area. We have a pretty, in my judgment, a pretty tough code in terms of preserving the natural environment. And I would just like to make sure that, people might have a vision that people are going to come in and blade 40 acres and put up, 10 lots per acre or 8 lots per acre or something like that. and that you're gonna have subdivisions. I mean, we have, what we call subdivisions are not what the valley calls subdivisions. I would just like, perhaps maybe some of that kind of information be available for residents when you're considering this balanced development with preservation, because and the restrict development of new homes, that even if all the lots are built out, it's not, like I say, it's not gonna look like Manhattan.
Or California.
Yeah. And I agree. There is sort of that visual aspect, I would say. I think what you're saying, kind of that open feel of Carefree. And I agree. I think we have good zoning standards that help sort of enforce that, particularly related to residential development. I guess the way, and Matt, you can correct me too, the way I'm kind of hearing some of these comments is that while, yeah, restricting your developments of new homes or balancing development, a lot of that space still is not necessarily public open space. And so I think they're kind of, I think they're talking about open space or open areas in two different ways, in my opinion. I feel like that restricting development of new homes is possibly related to the state land discussion. That's just how I read it. I don't know if that's the facts or not.
And that kind of goes back to the semi-rural character. I don't know how much high-density zoning we have, the second bullet point under that. I don't know that there's much dirt around that permits I don't know what their that might be high density.
I think it,
Right.
Yeah, that probably
Think
is.
it
That's
is.
town center, and that's not the general, anyway. Some of this zoning questions and where the vacant land is might clarify some of, maybe not, but I just don't, that doesn't sound like it just doesn't register to me as being very informed with the environment that we're in.
you would be accurate in some of our concerns with some of the feedback, that it's, again, we want to present the feedback as it was provided so that there's no concern about cherry picking or leaving something out. But you're absolutely right that we felt the same, that there's a education level there as opposed to, and that's what we're desiring to explore in our next workshop, which is you'll see when we get into the goal topics on these next slides, is there were a lot of comments on the goals, which we know is the goal doesn't provide a lot of context, right? And so a lot of the comments from residents were, well, it depends, right, on where you're going with this goal. And so when we start showing some of the policies that go along with that at the next meeting, we're hoping that that is that education level of, hey, what we're really, I guess, maybe the broad message here is, I don't think the general plan is that far off from what residents want. I think it's letting residents know that you have a lot of good content in your plan that does what you want it to do. We just need to make sure that residents are aware that it's there, and then try to understand if they think that it's not being adhered to and why, and some of that. Any other comments? Okay. So this is, again, something that we just felt like you would like to see. This is a summary of, we, again, took the goals to the community through Community Workshop 2, either in person or online, and asked residents to identify, keep, remove, revise. And then we also obviously asked the commission to identify those. So the scoring here, I think what we wanted to bring attention to is when we look at, for example, this first comment from the land use elements, the 5 goals here, you can see that there's some commonalities, even though it's a smaller group, obviously, in terms of the Planning Commission. That first comment, a lot on the Planning Commission thought that there's room for improvement there. and the community felt the same. When we look at goal 2, there was general support, I think, from the Planning Commission, and you can see from the community overall. But when you get into the third goal, again, there's at least some thought, while it's one, in a small group, there was consideration that just like the community, maybe some refinements to goal 3 could be beneficial, and then same for goal 5. So that's really what I wanted to just share with you, that these specific goals where we hear from residents and we see some consensus from the Planning Commission that there's maybe a need to revisit some of these, where some may be strong as is. These are the types of goals that we may want to vet with the community to a higher degree at that next workshop, to understand how we might refine it or address their concerns.
Matt, can
Yeah.
I ask a question or make an make an observation about the first one? Encourage the transition from less intense to more intense land uses, and you know, I kind of, it looked like you're right, that many talked about improving that language, although there is a strong number about removing it, and I'm wondering if it's about how it's worded, because when I think about kind of the community input lately and what we're hearing and how this process has been moving, just listening to that, it sounds to me like we're trying to say, hey, go from our less intense land uses to more intense ones, versus I think you and I know as planners, that's more about what happens between these types of land uses, and maybe that one will be interesting and might want to, you know, kind of discuss further or understand better, because I kind of see, like, in my opinion, I guess, it looks like a great, to me, there's quite a difference between what the community is saying for the most part and what the commission might be saying.
I would agree that that's exactly what it's trying to say, and what the viewpoints are, that it is trying to simply say that that it's preferred that you transition from low density to higher density, but when you read the goal by itself, it looks like it may be encouraging more intensive development, and I don't think that's the case. So what would be helpful for us to understand, rather than just blindly revising that, is that we want to take this goal and share the policies that go along with that in the workshop, so then residents can see, okay, well, I understand now where you're going, but I still don't think the goal says what these policies are trying to do. And so some might say, well, why don't we just provide that up front? But then we would have printed the entire general plan and just asked the community to read it. And so this is our way of just trying to zero in on the areas, pinch points, if you will, that that have maybe some of the most discussion or thought. So Stacy's spot on that desire is where we're taking it next, is to understand if there is just a simple miscommunication in the wording, or if the actual goal itself is not workable.
So if I understood what you said, you're saying that between a use of commercial and a use of residential, there ought to be a transition zone, as opposed to taking the town from a less dense development to a more dense development.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
well, that goal definitely needs to be reworded at minimum.
Well, and I look at it too, and sometimes, you know, we look at other communities when we craft these things, and a lot of times we look at, or a lot of communities are looking at large developments that are going from, you know, it's one type of land use, and they're trying to do some commercial and high density residential and low density residential, and how you kind of design where those uses happen is where you talk about these transitions. So,
Yeah, that's
but I think, yes, Peter, that's to your point.
So that's what, as I move on to the circulation element, there's 4 goals within that. You can see if, again, you're gonna see the numbers fluctuate, especially from the public, because it was, some residents skipped certain ones, especially when we were in person, by using sticky dots. Some residents just put Post-it notes on if they had a revision, but didn't put a sticky dot. So we just tried to be very flexible, I guess, in terms of acknowledging that there were fluctuation in terms of community feedback on goals 2, 3, and 4. So helping residents further understand what is meant by those seems worthwhile. So then if we move on to open space, what's interesting from an open space standpoint is, again, if you look at community workshop in terms of the number of residents that said keep, they were relatively high when we compare to all the other responses. So that's why we identified these somewhat in yellow, because what's interesting is that we heard from the community overall that open space is important through different comments in different areas, but when we review the actual goals associated with open space, there seemed to be somewhat support, but you could see that some residents, and that's why we mined the detailed comments about what is it do they specifically think from a revision standpoint is missing. So again, something that we would look to maybe unpack or further explore in that open space workshop. So here, from a growth element standpoint, you can see that all of the growth comments from the public received a lot of questions, if you will. I looked over all of the comments individually, or the Post-it notes that were received, and a lot of them struggled with just marrying up the notion of growth overall. And that's why it's kind of shown in yellow, is that state statute requires the general plan to have a growth element. And I think and we see this in it's almost a given. Every community we work in, the first question when they see this title is, why are we advocating growth to begin with? And so that's why on this one, I think it requires some additional education on the purpose of the growth element, and then we can start to maybe calibrate what the intention of the growth element is relative to these goals. Questions or comments before I move on?
Just one comment. I think growth means a lot of different things to a number of people. So that has to be clearly defined
Exactly.
in this case.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem with, and it, again, might be something that is advantageous when we take the organizational structure to the community, is that growth doesn't become a chapter, it becomes a topic, and then it's not as prevalent, if you will, in the plan, because the intention of the growth element from a statute standpoint isn't to advocate growth, it's to look.
Address it.
Exactly, right. So residents, I think, often see the title and think there's that the community is advocating for growth, when it could actually be the reverse.
Yep.
So then we also have the environmental element, and so you can see goals 1 through 4, there was general support, especially from a community standpoint. But then as we get into the goal 5, there was less support, and really they all focused on that particular one around the notion that carefree, a lot of residents just commented they didn't know that this was a necessary goal, because Carefree's small and can't really move the needle. We're, I mean, we're gonna explore this. My anecdotal personal viewpoint is that might be true, but it might still be worthwhile to have, even if we're not necessarily by ourselves going to move the needle. But that notion of if everyone's trying to, you know, carry the baton, that we might move the needle. So that one, again, is an example of how we bring it to the residents for further discussion. And then the last we grouped because there were few goals associated with each one, but there's one goal in cost of development, 3 goals in water resources, and 1 goal in public services and facilities. And again, from a support standpoint, we generally had support for the water goals broadly, but not as strong as maybe some of the other goals that we saw in, you know, with higher keep scores, if you will. But certainly the cost of development in public services and facilities, those goals did indicate that we need some more review of that. And again, I think some of that, especially relative to cost of development, is the struggle of that's a state element requirement, cost of development, and therefore I think residents are just probably trying to understand why that was a topic and is it absolutely necessary. And so again, if we choose that maybe a different organization of the document is favorable, then something like that doesn't become, you know, a chapter, if you will, but a topic in the plan.
On that first one, cost of development, I think there's some, either words missing or typos or something. Acquire adequate funding and mechanisms are in place to provide necessary services to existing and new developments. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's not
And there's been other,
correct.
and we've talked about, there's been other things like that. And before the community workshop, I don't know whether you could make a correction and just note it as a correction, that it was in the existing plan, but it was an error.
Yeah, I think there was some residents that made that note
Yeah.
on the in-person workshop as well. So we can maybe put parentheses or something to suggest
Yeah.
what the actual intent was. So that broadly was to share with you, you know, the results of your homework and how we were actually going to use that to inform the rest of the process. And so with your input and the input of the residents, we're going to further vet the policies associated with some of these goals at our next workshop, because all of that is intended to start to have a strong foundation of all the information we need to start drafting the plan. So with the open house, or open space I should say, workshop, and we'll address water as well, with all of that, we're looking to be in a position to start being comfortable drafting recommended revisions to the plan so that we can start sharing some of that work as we approach our August timeline. So with that, I would say that next steps, just updates, just for information purposes. The community survey results are on the project website. The existing conditions analysis is now on the project website as well. We have our community workshop number 3 coming up on 6/19, so you can see that format and organizational structure and the goal and policy validation are going to be 2 of the key aspects. And then the open space workshop has now been scheduled for July 17th. And so if you're able, we would encourage you. I know I've seen commissioners at our previous meetings, and so to the extent your schedule allows, please feel free to attend these upcoming workshops because you could start to even hear, directly from residents about the tone and the concerns on various topics that we try to capture in all of the reporting, but sometimes, you can also glean some things just from being there in person. So with that, Chair, I'll turn it over to you if there's any additional questions or suggestions. We're all ears.
Item 3 and 4.
Well, I don't know, maybe it might be worth if the public has any comments or questions, if they'd like to come up and be a part of the dialogue. This is different than town council, come on up to the podium. We don't need to do any cards, and it's not a limitation, it's questions and comments, yeah. Say what,
I wouldn't know what rambling looked like.
No, just go ahead and say what you
Thank you. I'm Wendy Mattis, Carefree resident. I wanted to speak to you because I'm one of those residents who cares deeply about the 48 acres. So much so that a group of residents and I got together and we formed a nonprofit organization with the intent to acquire and preserve that land. We just don't want to see it developed. We don't want a pickleball court. We don't want houses there. It's one thing that Carefree really lacks is open space. If we want to hike, we have to get in our car and drive to Scottsdale or Cave Creek. Having access to 48 acres would enable us to have a safe place to walk our dogs, ride our bikes, or just hike that's in our community. We're not walking along the side of the road. We would love to do this with the cooperation and help of the town if possible. If not, we will raise the funds ourselves and just go through auction and purchase that land. So I wanted to let you all know that there's a very large group of residents who care very deeply about this. So any help that you might be willing to give us would be greatly appreciated. We're aware of the process. We've been in touch with the State Land Department. So we're moving ahead with that, and I would just ask for all your support.
Thank you.
What is the name of your nonprofit?
It's Carefree Park. So
What's
if you,
your website?
carefreepark.org. And we do have our 501c3, and our one of my neighbors is working on it right now to accept donations. But we've started already getting pledges, and I think we are pretty well along the way. So I just wanted to let you all know.
And if I could pile on that statement, I thank you for reminding me as part of the open space workshop. We've also reached out to the State Land Department, and they will be attending that particular meeting so that we can hopefully have informative conversation, given that they control that specific property. But I understood through that coordination that you had coordinated with them as well. So I think that's fantastic, because that's the hope and goal, is that everyone has the same information and we can make better decisions about path forward.
Thank you. May I ask who from State Land is coming?
Karen Dada
Okay. I can't be there
at the workshop.
at the workshop on the 17th.
We're
Sorry.
happy to speak with you offline if you wanted a specific follow-up, or we're gonna make the information from that meeting available online. I don't know that we're gonna be able to record it, but that.
Well, we'll stream it, but yeah, the only downside about streaming is, we can't do the interaction from,
Yeah.
Right.
from the outside, but you'll be able to watch it. I think
I think
your-
if I get reception
permits,
in
right.
Hawaii,
You may not want to,
Oh.
right?
I hope
Otherwise-
you're doing
I don't know
something
you're gonna,
else,
I don't know
but
if you're gonna wanna do
otherwise
that.
I would be here for sure, but
no,
thank you.
Thank you.
I think we thank you for your comments, and we want to work with you in terms of finding ways to hear from residents to get to something in the plan that will be usable moving forward. So I mean, that's at least my goal from the general plan standpoint at this open house workshop, is to clarify with residents that the general plan can do some things, but it can't do all things. And so that's where we want to make sure that everyone's expectations are working in the same path, because we don't obviously want to craft a plan and think we did an awesome job and pat ourselves on the back and then find out that residents feel like it didn't go far enough. So
Wendy, the other thing I might offer is if you have some questions that you might like to send to myself or to Matt ahead of time so that we make sure it gets covered in that meeting,
Okay,
you're
I will
welcome to do that, yeah.
Thank you, Stacy. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter?
of course.
Right.
Can we get today's presentation? That wasn't in our packet.
No.
But that would be helpful, maybe even posted on the,
We'll be posting it, yeah, it all goes up.
the second thing is, when I when I clicked on the website for General Plan Virtual Workshop number 2, it said virtual participation is open until June 30, 2023.
Okay.
Is that true? I mean, are you still taking survey I don't,
Well, that's, again, that's the input that Matt was talking about, where.
that would be the goal survey, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And that's open until June 30th?
Yes. That.
Can you vote more than once?
Use a different name.
Well,
You'd
they
have
don't
to
ask your
use a
name, do they?
different IP address.
You will know.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
What would be the point of that?
At a place to gather, I can go.
That's
and-
right. Diverse place.
May I?
John?
Okay. John Trainer, Carefree resident. Thank you for the time and the presentation, and I look forward to the presentation next week. A couple of observations that I made as I was listening to the questioning up here. And I guess the first topic that caught my attention was the discussion of what's a valid survey. I kind of trust the expert as to what is a valid survey. And I sat through 2 presentations so far where it was, well, actually today is the 3rd, where it was explained, I thought, adequately. And you don't get a survey in a town like this of 2,000 people. 2,000 people don't respond. But we are all residents, and ultimately, I guess the message is we all have one vote. Nobody has 5 or 10 or 20 votes. We all have one vote. And the goal, I think, for everybody involved is that we get this process completed, it goes on the ballot, and successfully passes. I think that's everybody's objective. So picking at wording today, I think, was maybe a little counterproductive. Matt was conveying what residents were saying. Now, you may agree or disagree with what they were saying, but they were speaking, and they have spoken. They will continue to speak, I being one of them. I did not yet complete my survey. I will tell you that several people contacted me and were troubled by the fact that they were requested to log in with a name and a email address. And I will be sending out a note saying it's not required. But the implication is that it was required, and it put a lot of people off. I'll just let you know that right up front. The point of the survey, I think, was to get people's opinion, not to track them down. Okay. The other thing that caught my attention was the discussion of how many lots we have, what is low density, what is high density. I don't think anybody believes that we shouldn't build homes here. I don't think that's the point at all. I think the point was build it respectfully for the environment. I don't know where you all live, but I live on an acre and a half, let's call it. My community is based on that kind of a zoning standard. The parcel of state land that we keep referring to, and I've been guilty of it too, I've been calling it 48 acres. The town administrator advised me, I think it was Gary, advised me that it's 40 acres. Whatever number it is, it's a big parcel of land. And right now, it's zoned for close to 2-acre development. The problem with zoning is that it has a nasty habit of changing. And we've seen that in a couple of places. And one of the places close to where I live that's disturbing to me, and Stacy knows this because we've exchanged some dialogue, is Eastwood. Eastwood is a blight on the eastern end of town.
Where is,
Where is it? It's near the corner of Pima and Cave Creek Road. It's to the west of the office
Pima-
park
Pima
that's on.
Norte.
Norte? Norte?
Yeah.
Norte?
Okay. That's about 10 acres of land, and I'm not sure exactly the number of homes that are on it, but I don't think they're an eighth of an acre. That, to me, is very high density in an environment where zoning has typically been at least 1 acre zoning, if not greater. R70, I think.
No, it was,
Oh, the original, I'm sorry, I was thinking of a different question.
the original, so it was a compilation.
I don't have this.
Well, it
on.
was a compilation of parcels, and it was both garden office and R135. I would say it was probably about 60-40 split, 60% garden office. R135 is a minimum lot size of 35,000 square feet, so we kind of call that acre zoning, yeah. No, it's an RUPD, which is a residential unit, plan of development, and I'll look to get the exact numbers, but I think it has a density of 4.25 dwelling units per acre, if I remember, and I think the lot sizes were, the smallest I wanna say was maybe 5,300 square feet, 5,500 square feet, and there was a bit of a variance in there as
The best
well.
way to get a perspective is go to Google Maps, key the intersection of Pima and Cave Creek Road, and look for the thing that looks like anthills everywhere. That's Eastwood,
It's adjacent to
It's- it's-
Pima it's adjacent to Pima Norte.
adjacent to
east,
Pima Norte, right?
West of, down Cape
The,
Creek Road.
the original development a community by the original developer is right close into town. I think it's on Hum Road, is that correct? El Marte, Stacy?
Oh, yeah,
Okay, it's on Hum Road.
same developer.
That's much closer into town. It's in an area with high-density development, and so that was never really an issue. But on the east end of town, which tends to be much more rural, Eastwood was a big issue. And you can tell it remains with me to be a big issue. So whatever happens on the state land, and just so you know, there are 2 parcels of land at that location. One was, I inappropriately referred to it as 2 state parcels. Gary corrected me. One parcel was purchased a number of years ago. It went through, I think, 2 different developers and never proceeded. I think the first time was because of the recession. I don't remember the details.
No either, but it is platted, it's a platted
Yeah, it's platted.
subdivision.
And the state land, whether it's 48 or 40, doesn't really matter. Low density, I think to most people means no tall buildings, no houses on top of one another. Pretty straightforward interpretation of what low density is. High density, if you ask anyone, will point to Eastwood. That's high density. And you can look at Google and you can see the differences in the surrounding communities. So that just was my perspective on that discussion about what's high density, low density. As far as the commercial developments, the corner of Tom Darlington and Carefree Highway was originally very low density, I think 5 acre zoning. It was rezoned a year or 2 ago, I forget which. It's now zoned, I forget the designation, help me out, Steve.
The northeast corner?
No, not the northeast corner.
The
Tom
northwest
Darlington
corner.
and Carefree Highway. Oh, yeah,
Oh, no, the northwest, you're talking about the northwest corner?
Yes.
I'm sorry, right, so the northwest
get my
corner,
compass
correct.
directions
No,
right.
I do the same, but when we talk about those corners, it's always
Okay,
happening.
one is now zoned for a resort of some sort.
Right, not zone, just to be, but in the wording is important, it's not zoned for a resort, it has a land use for resort, so it has to go through a zoning process to become a resort, development.
To become a resort.
Right. so
Okay, but it
doesn't have-
was rezoned.
It wasn't rezoned, so it went through a general plan amendment, so we changed the land use, kind of this whole conversation. But for example, if somebody wanted to come in and build it based on its zoning, it's 2 acre lots. So it hasn't been zoned yet for that,
Okay,
for resort development, so.
thank you. Okay, that's really all I wanted to say. I didn't want to be rude and interrupt during the meeting. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. And I bid you a good evening.
Thank you.
Hi, Stacy. John Mattis, my better half already spoke. And Matt, I appreciate the reach out. We didn't know the date of the land use at the time when we made our reservations, and they're made, flights and everything, and then all of a sudden the 17th comes up and goes, anyway.
Excuse me, John, could you pull the microphone a little bit closer? I think Samantha was saying, because like we said, we want to get
That's
everybody.
usually my statement. Transparency was a big issue through this plan, and I think I can speak to that a little bit. Since we moved here, I've been asking the town to somehow reach out without expecting people to look at a website, without expecting people to sign up. That's the way it was when we first moved here. Put your name in, see what meetings, commissions you want to be advised of, so you get the agenda beforehand and you can get a date to appear. Well, that changed about 6 months ago, and we missed a planning meeting. In fact, I think it was your first planning meeting. Probably had nobody here except I think it was Stephanie Barber. That's why. That changed. They send out a newsletter now which has the whole month's worth of meetings on it. I've spoken to Steve about it. I've spoken to John Crane about it. I don't know if that's ever been fixed or not. I know your communications director is no longer here.
We're trying, yeah.
I know, I understand that. But there's an easy way to fix this. I've been sort of hammering this for 5 years. And it was used once. When the property tax came about, it was an insert in your water bill. Either it be email or an address for the post office box. That is a great way to be able to communicate. For whatever reason, the general plan put a flyer in the monthly email. People might not read it, but then that's their fault. They get it. You can't expect, especially a lot of people are not technically savvy, okay? When my wife needs something done with the computer, I'll walk over to it and usually it works. I don't know why, but that's the joke in the house. But it's important to get information to people instead of expecting them to read a bulletin board at the post office or every day check the website, what's come up now. There are ways to do it, and it's frustrating, and that's why you got the comments for the general plan, transparency. Don't do a public records request in this town. I'm still waiting for some things. That's a frustration. That's not transparency. There is no policy and procedures for employees in this town. Is anyone else shocked and amazed about that? I did a public records request on that. I got I wanted a policy and procedure, and I wanted a rating form. I got a rating form, but I didn't get a policy and procedure. Took me 3 emails and a meeting with John Crane to find out there are no policies and procedures. Why is that so hard to say? And then I got an email over the weekend from the town attorney saying your public records request has been satisfied. Well, obviously he didn't talk to John Crane. You don't have a policy and procedure. It's, again, the town attorney who is supposed to be representing this town should have been able to tell me we have no policy and procedure. That's a liability. It truly is. So it goes to the transparency of this, and I don't want to make it a big deal about public records responses, but it's a transparency issue, and that's why you got that. And it wasn't just for me. A lot of people are very frustrated about that with this town. Anyway, thank you for your time. Thank you very much for sitting up there and taking the slings and arrows, which I don't think were too bad tonight.
Thank you, John.
we'll take that back. No, I mean, I appreciate, John Mattis's comments. A lot of it I can't speak to, but, we'll take it back and bring you back some response to that. But, yeah,
Motion,
but so I have anything else
motion to
tonight.
adjourn? Okay. All in favor? Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.